Hey everyone, my name is Melissa. Today I'm going to be talking about what I learned doing my thesis, kind of like just talking about it, and also painting my phone case because you know when like clear cases get all like gross and yellow because the plastic is degrading or whatever. So I feel bad like throwing it out because it's fine, like physically, it just looks gross. So I'm going to paint it so we don't see the yellow anymore. And I'm gonna paint it like, I'm gonna put the picture up, but it's gonna be these like really pretty, like hanging trees type thing. All right, I'm gonna start off by like, there's these little like green kind of like hanging things. So I'm gonna try and draw that out. And then my plan is to go over with some like white poofy things at the top. And then I'm gonna draw the branches in. All right, so as I paint, I want to just like kind of give you guys some of the stats for my actual thesis. So first of all, I ended up writing about 30 pages, so that's including figures, references, everything. I had about 65 references, and my intro and results were both about 1,000 words, and my discussion was about 1,500. So I guess just to give you guys a sort of idea, the introduction is more of like a literature review type thing. Then the result is literally just describing your figures. So you want to still tell a story with what you're writing, like have some sort of followable point that you're trying to make. So kind of like proving or disproving your hypothesis. Well, not like proving because you can't technically prove anything, but let's say disproving or not disproving your hypothesis. And then the discussion is taking these results and actually interpreting them. So the results will always be correct. So the result section, you will just be describing your figures. Your figures might not be correct, that's a different thing, but your results will always be correct because it is purely a description of what you've gotten. Versus your discussion could be totally wrong because it's your interpretation. So if somebody else has those same results and interprets them in a completely different way, that could be valid. One of you could be wrong. So that is just something to keep in mind. So I was like pretty scared about my thesis last year, not gonna lie. And what I ended up doing was I talked to a bunch of older students and kind of saw what they were dealing with so that I could either, avoid their mistakes or do what they did well. And one thing in particular, I was talking to one student, she told me how a lot of her experiment actually kind of failed. Like there was this freak lab thing where her cells were just contaminated and she had to restart in like December after so much work. So one thing that I think I actually did really well was I had started in third year. So if you're watching this like and you're in second year or you're just starting university or whatever, keep that in mind. You want to kind of get yourself into a lab that's interesting to you so you at least have lab experience. It would be even better if you could get a lab where you want to stay for your honors thesis, because I got so much work done in my third year that by the time I got to my fourth year, I was doing things that like really interested me and I didn't have to train at any point. I also had a lot of data because when my project did fail, I was able to rely on this data that I had previously collected in order to write my honors thesis. I honestly can't imagine where I'd be if I hadn't had all my third year work. But yeah, and that leads me to my next point, which is just be ready to scramble no matter how prepared you are. I talked to so many people. I thought I was so ready. I was like, I got this. I don't know what other people are complaining about, but I was not ready. And I don't think anybody actually is fully ready unless you've written a thesis before. And probably even if you have written a thesis, it's an experience. Nobody's ever perfectly prepared and you can't do it perfectly. It's just impossible. So sorry to all the perfectionists out there. I feel you. So another thing that I did really well, I think, is that I was collecting my sources throughout the year, actually, and throughout third year as well. I used Mendeley, which I hate Mendeley, but I should have used a different citation software like Zotero or something. But point is that you should use a software which collects all of your citations the entire time you're in that lab, because you will like be able to turn back to it. You're like, oh, I remember reading this one paper. and you have no idea what it's called, but it will be in your citation manager. So that is something that I found so useful and definitely a lifesaver. I definitely recommend people do that. Another thing that I did really well was I actually wrote a lot of my introduction back in the fall. It was an assignment for one of my classes, but oh my gosh, great idea. If you have the time, you should go through and just do a literature review, because that's kind of what your introduction is going to be, just talking about all the things that have been done in whatever project you're working on. And you'll be able to, even if you end up changing your project later on, chances are you'll still be able to use quite a bit of it. Like my first introduction, I was going to be doing wet lab and dry lab. So wet lab is basically things like on the lab bench, so like in person, versus dry lab is more bioinformatics, like computer stuff. And I had been doing a mix, but I ended up changing my project so that it was just dry lab. So I couldn't use my entire introduction that I had written, but I was still able to use quite a bit of it. And honestly, that feels amazing when you can just copy and paste like 500 words of something that you've written before. Amazing. Definitely recommend doing it. Like even during the summer, go through and everything that you're reading, just put basic literature review. It does not have to be long. I think mine was around like 500 words, but my thesis, like the guidelines for my thesis introduction was that it should be around 1,000 words, but still super helpful. Another thing that I found really useful was that we had actually had to do a poster presentation. And so I had prepared some of my figures like a while ago, and even like presenting at conferences with some of the data that I had collected, it was really nice because I was able to use these figures that I'd used before. I just like had to tweak them a bit, but it was definitely a good decision to do. So if you have some like preliminary data, just put it into a figure. Just get into the habit of doing that. One other thing that I would do is whenever we had a lab meeting, we would present what we've done throughout the week. Even if you're not presenting, it's a good habit to just take all your data and put it into a figure and make a figure caption, and you will find that you're collecting like this whole group of figures that you will be able to use later on in your thesis. And finally, one thing that I had done really well was I handed in my thesis a day early, so a day before the deadline. I think that this was great for me personally because I didn't have to deal with it anymore, but also I think it leaves a good impression on the evaluators, especially since I heard that they only have like a week to evaluate or something. In any case, they have very little time and they have to get through like 2 or 3 theses. Is that the plural? So I sent it in early because I figured it would probably be nice for them because it was due on Friday. And so I sent it on Thursday, and I'm thinking like if I were one of the evaluators, I probably would have tried to get it done on Friday so that I could have the weekend off. I don't know, just something I think that I did well. Do I think that taking an extra day to write more would have helped? No, because at that point I had already like had a draft, had it checked over by people, and had looked at it for far too long. So I'm glad that I did that. Let's talk a little bit about things that I think I did poorly. One thing is, well, actually the main thing, I had kind of like decided to add quite a bit to my thesis in April, and my thesis was due end of April. So this was kind of silly of me, but since my entire project is bioinformatics, I was thinking, oh, like I could just do that really quickly. Oh man, hilarious. So yeah, that's just one thing that I wish I had not done. I really like all the data that I added, and I think it's super interesting, but I wish I had like gotten that inspiration back in March so that I could have had all of April like purely for writing and just like putting things together like at a really relaxed pace instead of the hustle that I had to do to get it done on time. So that is, yeah. But again, it doesn't matter how much you plan, you're gonna be hit by like random setbacks, and they're gonna come out of nowhere. Trust me. It always happens to every single person. And so kind of following that, like I wish I just like planned my time a little bit better. Just to give you guys an idea, for 2 pages, I had about 30 citations, and that is a lot of papers. So having that kind of ready beforehand is super, super, super helpful. As for the actually putting the figures together, that took the second longest because I had so many figures, which I had generated so late in the game. And then the results were the quickest, definitely, because you're pretty much just describing what you have in front of you. And then discussion, I'd say that's the one that I recommend doing the last, because by the time you've put together like the introduction and results and figures and all that, you've kind of like in the back of your mind been thinking about the analysis of everything you're putting together. And so I wrote out the discussion pretty quickly, although it was not as quick as the results. The results were definitely the fastest section. So anyways, if you are planning on writing a thesis, this is kind of my advice. This is what I did. Have you written a thesis yet? What other advice do you have? Are you going to be writing a thesis, or are you just considering it? Whatever comments, questions, anything you have, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. Also check out my description for my Instagram, and I will talk to you later. Bye.